Afternoon for you. What's going
Evening
on?
almost, right? It's
Evening.
dark. Hello, hello. Welcome to the final episode of season 10. Wow, what a season. But before we talk about the season, because it's final episode and because it's kind of our Christmas episode, um, I've got a Christmas joke for you. Would you like to hear my Christmas
I
joke?
was worried you were going to say I've got a joke, but
I'm sure you meant to say I was
there we go.
delighted, right? That
Let's
this
hear
is
it.
for a joke. Here we go. Okay. Why is
Oh, sorry.
December
Did I
such
not
a
say
cool?
that?
Okay, so let me tell you my joke.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
It's a good joke. Why is December such a cool month?
I don't know why.
Because it has brr in the name.
That's really bad.
That's what I'm here for. Ta-da.
It's-
Um,
You're
there we
here
go.
all week. All right.
And we've been doing this for 10 seasons. Everybody now wishes that season
There's
11
plenty
never.
more where that came from, right?
Well, you never know. It might be a surprise. It's Christmas miracle and all. Anyway, final episode of season 10. 11th episode. It's been a really fun season. Even without jokes. So
Yeah, we didn't have too many jokes, so maybe next season you can have a joke for every episode.
you'll be so happy if that happens, won't you?
Yeah. So welcome everybody. We're just delighted to have a special guest with us to wrap up season 10 today, and just a reminder for everybody that our whole season we've been talking about the book project, where we invited disaster scholars to write essays about thinkers that inspired their work, and it's been incredible to work on, and then extra special just to talk through with some of the authors on the season. So we've already had 10 wonderful conversations that you can see on YouTube recorded, or wait for them to come out on audio on your favorite podcast listening place. I don't know what's the right word.
App, device.
App,
There's so
device,
many
yeah.
options.
There's so many better words than place. Anyway, so this season we when we thought about doing the season, we wanted to look at major themes. And so if you look at the start of season 10, a lot of the initial discussions were around like feminism, anarchism, Black power, urbanism, things that came through in a lot of essays. And so we brought some guests together to discuss the themes. Then we moved into like different countries where we had authors and thinkers that were inspiring disaster scholars from different countries, and we moved into regions as well. And so I had kind of these regional discussions for the last couple of live streams. And some of the things like that just stood out, I think, is just like the importance of diverse voices and learning from different types of knowledge production as well. And that, and almost every time we talked with scholars in disaster who contributed to this volume, we ended up talking about thinking from outside of disaster studies. And that was that's kind of why we did the book. And it's just really cool to find a lot of people on the same page with appreciation for like wide reading and thinking. And it's super cool. So
Yeah, it's great, and hopefully the book will come out next year. It's been reviewed at the moment, but we've been talking a lot about the book and different chapters that the book has. But what I don't think we mentioned before is also that our book has a preface, and this preface is written by wonderful Susanna Hoffman. We were so excited when Susanna agreed to write it for us, and we're even more excited to welcome Susanna on the podcast today. Welcome.
Welcome.
I'm happy to be here. I love this idea. Let's go forever. Let's go all day.
Let's go all day. Amazing. I can always throw some more jokes as we go along as well.
I'll match you in that.
Amazing. Here we go. Jason, beware. Anyway, I don't think Susanna needs introductions, to be honest, but here we go, just for the sake of the format. So Susanna Hoffman is a disaster anthropologist, author, co-author, and editor of 13 books, 2 ethnographic films, and over 40 articles and chapters. Susanna launched the Risk and Disaster Thematic Interest Group for the Society of Applied Anthropology. She initiated and chairs the Commission on Risk and Disasters for the International Union of Anthropology and Ethnographic Sciences. And Susanna was also the first recipient of the Fulbright Foundation Algin Initiative grant concerning disasters between Greece and Turkey, and helped write the UN Statement on Women and Disasters. And that's just like a tiny snippet of everything that Susanna does. So it's so great to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. I like being a snippet.
This is going to be great today. Jason's going to regret his life choices.
So Susanna, we're so happy that you agreed to write a preface for the book, and in that preface, you reflected on books that influenced the way that you think, and it really is kind of where we started our discussion with a lot of our guests this season, is just getting to that idea of like reflection on who inspired you. So we were just wanted to start the same way with you and ask you to share a bit about what kind of things you read, any authors that are really important to you, and maybe like current reads or recommendations that you can share with us.
I think I'll start with the way I started the preface, which is to say that where many people in disaster studies come from a particular, I think silos may be too strong, but field, a subfield, like economics or political science or something like that. I am an absolutely pure cultural anthropologist. I am not part of any subfield. I am a broad and deep cultural anthropologist. So what's influenced me is the whole scope of the field, starting from the original definition by Tyler about the culture is all of those things contributing, the knowledge, beliefs, art, morals, laws, customs, rituals, all of the aspects that go into a people's culture, the depth of history. And so to begin with, and by the way, I began reading this stuff when I was about 14, coming from what I would call a mini misogynist background, that it was not biracial or particularly, it was a little bit bicultural. I felt like I was growing up in the movie Annie Hall in the split screen session, where half of the people in my family sat on their thumbs during a dinner and the other half were like this, So I was very concerned early on as to what made me what I am. And I always thought that psychologists were more sophisticated because they could go into why they were the way they were, and I was back at what. So I began reading anthropology stuff. And also I grew up in Denver, and there were many indigenous groups in Denver circulating because of our terrible history of treating them. And also there were cowboys like crazy. So there was all of this stuff going on. So after I became interested, I knew I wanted to be an anthropologist at the age of 14, that and a dancer, and one of them lasted. The other only lasted a decade or so. And so my background is really broadly in anthropology from the beginning, from people like Kroeber and Boas, Margaret Mead, on to the British anthropologists like Radcliffe Brown, and he discussion of functionalism, which was that every custom in a society has some use, which we then began to say, no, but you're impugning it from the outside. This is very Western, that to impugn what a function is, to something like Evans Pritchard, who talked about segmentary opposition, which we see in disaster studies a great deal. That is, pick an enemy and you form a group. And the further outside your enemy is, the bigger your group is. And anthropologists, disaster survivors always pick an enemy as they're surviving. It could be the government. It's frequently the government. It could be the insurance company. It could be, and then they self-define who's in and who's out by saying, okay, you lost your complete house, you're in, but you only have damage, you're out. So there's definitions in which people sort people. And then from there, of course, I read a zillion ethnographies of the Irish, the Haitians, the Brazilians, the Greeks, the Turks, the Hausa, the Fulani, and how these cultures were so different. And I still read a lot of anthropology. Now, I come from the American tradition, which is what we call the Four Fields tradition. I don't care what you call it. It's the kind of stuff that we have to know to really understand a culture. So I'm pretty steeped, as well as in cultural anthropology, in biological, physical anthropology, which really helped when I decided to tackle a book on the disaster of COVID and the study of isolation. It's a book that's coming out in Berghound next year. It's called In Placement. And then I do a lot of archaeology. And frankly, I read a lot of archaeology still, because the depth of culture is a real interest to me. What happened after the explosion of Santorini and the entire Eastern Mediterranean changed culture, became Indo-European, for example. And I read a lot of linguistics, and I do that because language reflects culture, and language influences culture, and culture influences language, as we know by the Encyclopedia Britannica's Word of the Year. I don't even remember what it is this year, something crazy. So I read a lot of that, but the funny thing about me too is that I read a lot of psychology. I read a lot of fiction, a tremendous amount of fiction. I read about 2 books a week, believe it or not, and I read really good writers because they tell stories of people in their cultures. I read Ian McEwan, for example, or I'll read Jess Waters on Beautiful Ruins, or I'll read The Last Painting of, I can't remember the whole thing, the title, Sarah something, because it talks about Dutch culture and what was going on with women at that time. And which is interesting to me because there was just an exhibit of Rembrandt's Esther at a museum in New York. And of course, the Dutch painted her as blonde and blue-eyed, and hardly representative, but very culturally influenced. So I read a tremendous amount. I read a lot. Also read when I'm writing, which is forever, and it seems like it will never end, because there's still 2 more books too. I got In Placement turned in, but Nostalgia is still due, as is Angry Earth 3. I read a lot of murder mysteries. They have to be well written. They have to be James Lee Burke or Elizabeth George or something like that. They have to be good, really beautifully written. But I read a lot of murder mysteries. So that's kind of the broad scope there.
I love that. Every time we meet and you're like, oh, and I have this new book I'm writing, and I just can't get my head around this. It's incredible, and we will talk about your work later. But also, whilst you were talking, so I checked the word of the year, and I found the Oxford Dictionary one, which is rage bait. So to connect, to provoke anger. That is the word of the year, and that also reminded me. Sorry, as promised, tangents. So we have an equivalent in Russia, and that's St. Petersburg, kind of Oxford equivalent, dictionary.
No, I think that's what I meant. Yeah, I just.
So they've just updated the definition of authoritarian regime, which I think you will both really like. So here goes the definition, as according to Russian kind of dictionary. This is a political form of governance based on the authoritarian regime of a certain person. Fine. Then the new edition is, this is the most effective form of governance in the context of difficult times for a country. Here we go. The end. Mic drop.
And it's difficult times. There is no doubt about the fact that it is very difficult times.
Difficult time. Yeah. So, discuss. Yeah, it's really quite fascinating. I don't think those people read quite as much as you do, perhaps, or maybe they read too much murder mystery and they're trying to.
I think it's difficult times on so many levels. That's everybody uses the word polarization, but it's more like a compound disaster. It's multi-zation, many levels of zation going on.
That should be a new word in the dictionary. But
well, I like that. I mean, look at my book, Emplacement. I mean, give me a neologism anytime. I will do it. I will make them up as I go.
We'll play with that. Let's talk about your books. And I would love to hear a little bit more about the new books that are coming out. But let's kind of go back in the books that you've written. Your writing is so diverse. I guess most of the disaster scholars, everybody's familiar with Angry Earth, for instance, that you co-authored with Tony Oliver Smith, or Catastrophe and Culture, also with Tony. This is just kind of the two ones that, I looked at my bookshelf and they were there. But of course, you also have written books about cooking and about modern relationship. Tell us more. How did you come to write in those books?
I'll start with the relationships one. Okay, let's face the fact that I live in abstract land. I'm not a very literal person. And maybe that's the whole anthropology background, is that we're trained to see patterns and we're trained to see something that's overarching. So I'm teaching at the university. I'm in San Francisco, and a bookseller comes through trying to peddle some academic books to me, and I said, how about a book that I see, that a nonfiction book, a book about men? And he said, well, how did you come up with that? The same thing. And I realized that I'm the kind of woman, and perhaps you are the kind of woman, Xenia, where many women come up to me and tell me their problems. I don't know why. Maybe it's the empathy from anthropology, but I realized that they were telling me the same story, different men, same story. And I said, there's a cultural pattern going on here. And I began to write them down. There's one man I call, comes on like a hurricane and is gone with the wind. I can't even remember some of the names, but I realized that women dating in my society were running into obviously strains of behavior from the men they were dating that were culturally learned. And I put those down, and that became 22 Types of Men and What to Do About Them, which supported us for several years. It did very well. And then that turned into Men Who Are Good for You and Men Who Are Bad, a version of the same thing. When it came to the cookbooks, there were two drivers behind that. One was as an anthropologist and a single parent of a couple of kids, I wasn't making enough money for us to float. And with my ex-husband, we had opened a very famous restaurant called Chez Panisse in Berkeley, very, very famous. And I'm a very good cook, and we had a marvelous chef called at the restaurant, Victoria. And when it came to, well, here's the story behind it. Of course, I did my field work in a very small village in a very tiny island in Greece, and I had spent 2.5 years living in a cave. And there were 3 copies of this in my house, one on my desk as I was working on it, one in the freezer, and one downstairs in the basement. And the Berkeley firestorm came down and burned down my house. And the fire was so hot, it was 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, that it burned up the freezer in the basement. And I lost all my work, so I couldn't do an ethnographic study. I'd actually already done it in film. It was a study on Indo-Europeans' division of time and space by gender. And it's the 3rd best-selling film in anthropology to this day, and other social science, women's studies, economics, a whole bunch of social sciences. It's called Kepseli. And so I thought, if I want to write an ethnography about my work, about Greece, which I adore Greece, people don't read a little academic ethnography, but they always read about food. And so I put all the stories into a 600-page book on cooking called The Olive and the Caper. And I've written 4 other cookbooks, but it was a way to tell this. If you open up my cookbooks, there's lots and lots of stories. There's good recipes, there's great recipes. I just was asked to do a Greek cranberry sauce for a very famous Greek restaurant in New York City. Greeks don't have cranberries, so it took some invention, including ouzo. But you'll see that my books are the cookbooks are full of stories. And this way people have used the olive and caper in academic classes to teach about society. So cookbooks have their value.
I love it because to me, the cooking and the whole food culture is about sharing stories and kind of talking and then, comparing the same recipe and then coming up with something completely different. So this is great.
It's very, very cultural. I mean, you're not over here and you don't do Thanksgiving, but Thanksgiving you'll find is a very possessive holiday. It's a celebration of America. It's probably our truest American celebration, but it's possessive. Like it has to be my cranberry sauce, my version of doing the turkey. And people fight about it because they possess particular recipes. That's part of the tradition. And they have to bring their beans and mushroom soup casserole, or they have to bring their mother's stuffing. And it's very interesting to see the dynamics of the family and the jealousies and whose house gets to have it set around a holiday. There's more to cooking than just cooking. There's more to kitchens than just heat.
Yeah, absolutely. Could you tell us a little bit about your new books that are coming out, The Emplacement and Nostalgia?
I realized, again, I live in abstract land, so these crazy ideas come to me in the shower or in the middle of the night. And I realized that the epidemic had caused a phenomena across our cultures that we had not experienced as anthropologists. Anthropologists study groups. That's been the whole thing from the beginning, different cultures. Culture is a group phenomena. But we don't much study isolation. But here we were in a situation where we were split apart from our cultures and societies. Now, this wasn't like displacement, where which disasters do a lot, displace people, send them away from where they grew up, where they lived, from their place attachments. This was being displaced within your own culture and society. You couldn't join it. You couldn't daily interact with it. And so I thought, it's really time, and considering westernization and culturalization, urbanization and coastalization, we're having more and more globally isolated people isolated from their own societies. And so I decided to take the theme of COVID and what went on during COVID and write a book, which I've titled Emplacement instead of Displacement. Edited with Virginia Garcia Acosta in Mexico City, head of CIESAS. And the point was not only to study what happened during COVID, but each anthropologist was charged with reflecting on their own society, what was going on in their own society and their own lives. As anthropologists, encouraged to say, okay, what are my thoughts about my own culture? What are my reflections about my own society? What happened when I was in isolation and could look at the laws and the actions of people in my own place? So the anthropologists were encouraged to write about isolation and about their own place and about self-reflection instead of other reflection. And that's what it's about. It's far more than a book about COVID. It's about a new branch of anthropology, the study of people separated from their cultures. And the next one is started from a phenomena that happens in disasters I just mentioned, and that is displacement. And it's not the only thing. Climate is certainly displacing more and more people. The reason for example, the United States has so much migration from Guatemala right now is the desertification of Guatemala is meaning that people can't grow food. Or we're seeing that kind of thing where crops are changing, people's lives are upset, and they're having to leave because of climate change. So what happens in displacement if people are resettled? And resettlement is a phenomenal failure. Mostly people stay in camps for generations often, or people don't adjust and they stay in enclaves. It's a very difficult problem, but I realize that part of the problem is because those dealing with displacement, as good as they are, we're dealing with culture on a very superficial level. That is the food they ate, the religion they have, the costumes they wore, some of their things about, patrimonialism or kinship and some stuff like that. But culture is much, much deeper. And unless you understand it, you can't really get to the bottom of why it's so difficult to resettle. So the book is called Nostalgia, Ecalgia, Topcalgia, which means pain of past, pain of home, and pain of place. Think about what home gives you. Home is not just home, it's familiarity, it's comfort. It is agency, because if you're a homeowner, it is sovereignty. It is much more than that. And it's structured and arranged by color and by space in a way. What the book has a great deal to do with perception. Now, perception of smell, taste, sight, hearing, touch, these are pretty much, if you read child psychology, and I read a lot of it, perception is pretty much locked down by the age of 13, 14, 15. And it's very, very difficult to change, which is why if you learn another language, you can't get rid of your accent because you actually don't hear the sounds. What you hear is locked into pattern already. So I thought I've got to deal and tell people about perception and the fact that people can't change how far in a distance they see, how they cut up color category. When I worked in Greece, they were constantly sending me back to get the red sweater or the red stew on the stove. It was brown. It was this color because they cut the categories of color differently. And they smell differently. And people, Kate Brown in her book about Katrina says people are still suffering because they can't get red beans, a particular kind of red bean that only comes there. So I talk a lot about perception. I talk about what things that are sacred that people haven't realized. There's sacredness in the landscape. There's sacredness in your house, a particular smell in your house, a particular scarf, the touch of a chair where your icons are kept, things like that. And so that book is on the depth of culture that is really needed in dealing with displacement. Then we were asked for anthropology, The Angry Earth 3, which is very, very flattering. I mean, academic books don't go into third edition very often at all. And this is Routledge, so it's very good. But each time we've added some new disasters, shall I put it, to Angry Earth. The last edition was only 5 or 6 years ago, and we had added displacement and added epidemic, added NGOs. This time I thought, Tony and I thought, well, what are we going to add this time? And there were some new things that are not discussed. Heat domes. Why in Pakistan and why in Phoenix are heat waves lasting not 5 days, not 7 days, but 100 days? That's a dome. What about the flooding? The huge amount of flooding and displacement in places now that is coming because obviously the water levels are rising, the glaciers, the water is moving. So we're adding that. The firestorms have grown enormously, so we've added firestorms. We've added a specific one on pandemics, and not just epidemic. And there's one other thing we've added that right at the moment I can't think. So The Angry Earth is coming out again next year. It's going to have 5 new chapters. It's going to have updates of all of the last edition's chapters. And I hope it has a cover that is equally vivid as a volcano or a firestorm that it's had before. Those are the three right now. And I also just did the update of the disaster chapter for the Handbook of the Environment. And there's other stuff. It's endless. I have to quit, and I can't.
No, it's great to hear about your process of like finding a way to communicate to different audiences through something that they care about. And I just love these books that you wrote, earlier on, when you're just very, very like connecting with an audience around cooking or around relationships is so cool. So and you said something that just made me start formulating a question for you around like possession of like Thanksgiving traditions or possession of a recipe. And it made me think about just disaster knowledge or ideas, and just science generally, and how many of us work in these silos where everybody like has possession of something or is an expert, and that can be very excluding for other voices, other perspectives, other experiences. And so I just wondered how you thought through like reaching people with ideas around risk and vulnerability, that in a way that's not exclusive and not like trying to maintain the position of like an expert or the owner of an idea, and making it a more like holistic conversation when we talk about disasters, because it's so easy to just get into a silo and an ivory tower kind of discussion where, say, community members are excluded from that.
Well, I think that's one of the big things about anthropology, is the stress on not only not excluding community members, but not just the officers or the officials of a community, but the people. One of my favorite things to say is the person who's going to tell you to evacuate is not your president or your village president; it's your grandmother. And when anthropologists work, they work really way down in the community. It's called participant observation. And we have, since the Angry Earth and the beginnings of anthropology's involvement in disaster studies, and by the way, it is the fastest growing field of anthropology, and should be at this point. We work very much with local voices, and local voices means the grandmother. It means the single parent. It means the man working the fields. And his place attachment to the fact that he needs to get back to do his crops. So he's willing to take a risk. You have to think of environment when you're doing this in a number of levels. Everybody thinks in a silo, using your word, on environment. It's just a thing. It's not just a thing. It has many, many levels to it. And the first place, it is the physical plane, which we generally is what we think of environment. But the fact of the matter is, you're sitting in your physical plane right now. You're sitting in an environment. But then humans always modify their environment. Absolutely everybody modifies their environment. Neanderthal modified the environment. Neanderthal dammed rivers and ate so many turtles that he made that a number of turtle species went extinct, and chipped rocks. And on top of that is the built environment, obviously, that we're sitting in now. And then there's culture, and culture dictates, or let's put it, maybe that's too strong, guides how the others are dealt with. What in the physical environment is sacred and untouchable, what can be modified, what can be built on it, and then how do we live in it. And that's what local people and local voices can tell us. And they can also tell us about this incredibly deep thing that we deal with all the time, which is, some people call it rootedness. That's become popular in England. But in anthropologists in disaster studied it a long time, and we called it place attachment. I have come to think of it almost as if it's terroir, like a cheese would have or a wine would have. When you grow up with those, as I was talking earlier, smells, tastes, particular views, what are the trees, how far? People in Greece could see and identify people, I swear, 2 miles away. I can only see as far as my screen. That's about it for me. The street corner. I mean, even the distance we see is different. That's when you learn what's going on and why they're willing to take risk. Now, is it risk? Is it vulnerability? Or is it precarity in our times? Or because of climate change, is vulnerability and exposure losing its strength as a concept? Certainly, another thing that's losing its strength as a concept is the difference between probability and possibility. We can't tell people that things are probable anymore. We can't say it's a 500-year flood. We can't say it's a 1,000-year earthquake, which they did in Japan before Fukushima. And so they took down the seawalls and put a nuclear reactor on it that had a fix that they didn't add. We have to talk about possibility. And so that concept has to collapse. Now I'm rattling on. So ask me a question.
Well, Suzanne, so I wanted to just think about this book and the fact that, like, it was kind of central to our thinking to ask, well, we realize a lot of our colleagues are like letting go of dogmas and letting go of like their own expertise and trying to become more generalists and trying to learn from outside of their box, and so that was kind of core to why we did the project in the first place. And so we have this kind of confluence of all these ideas from different authors who are learning from all these thinkers all over the place. And I just wondered, like, how you like, does that give you hope for the scholarship in disaster studies, for the scholars, for the authors, the way that they're thinking, like that really broad influence from different fields and different parts of the world?
It does, except I'm looking for more deduction over induction. I'm looking, and the reason, and I totally agree, I think we're interdisciplinary and we have to work in an interdisciplinary manner now. But I am looking for us to go back to looking at overall concepts, something like the concept of vulnerability, which Hewitt gave us and has been useful for everybody. Not just a particular study of a particular disaster or somebody's particular theory, as you're pointing out, from their own influence. I'm looking for us to start saying some generalized overarching principles that are going to lead us so that it's not one fire, it's all fires. It's not one flood, it's all floods. It's not one disaster, it's all disasters. And at the point where academics in particular are funded and given something for particularized studies that they can count numbers or not make leaps of understanding, then we're stymied. And we have to start taking real leaps of understanding. And yes, an interdisciplinary foundation is one of the ways to do it. And influences from outside. I noted that when I wrote the preface that there were major people in fields like Latour cited, but there were also Greek philosophers cited as influential. We need more historians who have seen this before, can talk about this before. We need environmentalists like Tim Ingold, who understand that environment is also emotional, not just not just the ground or a tree to cut down. That's, to my mind, what we're at the point where we're at, where we have to start making some very general leaps. The other thing we have to do, and this takes interdisciplinary work as well, is get into policy, which has always been the wall that we can't get into. And luckily now, more and more, at least anthropologists are getting hired by NGOs who have discovered that they've created huge failures, or they've created dependencies, or that they didn't understand why resettlement isn't working. We have to get into policy. That has always been a hard part. And we have to get into policy with these rich backgrounds of philosophy where we can say, that's not what David Harvey says about disaster capitalism, or Naomi Klein, or that's not, this is what's going on in the Brazilian jungle. This is why development causes disaster. And what was it? I just saw huge floods in Indonesia yesterday, and it's because it's deforested. And until we get to this cross-cultural, cross-disciplinary thing, we're stymied. But the thing has to not get out of academia. It has to get out of academia as well. So as well as bringing in all these people with different influences in terms of there's a scholarliness. My father would have called them scholastic boobs. He told me not to be. He said not to be judged by them. Do not let yourself get judged by scholastic boobs. It was a great thing to say, and that set me free. We need to get people who are actually involved in government and policy making in the levels of government way up. We got an anthropologist in WHO. We had Paul Farmer. In terms of epidemics, that's just the anthropology thing, but all of us. And also, we need to be, I feel that a lot of my disaster scholar friends need to be influenced by anthropology. They're not seeing the depth of it. They're talking about, how to build a house that doesn't, blow down, or what the, some, or the counting something. And we've got to get the whole earthly community into this.
And I absolutely agree with you on this. But talking of leaps, what I'm seeing more and more in that, instead of kind of making any effort to leap forward, or just kind of sideways somewhere, the leaps seem to be kind of backwards, so it's one step forward, three step back sort of situation, where, for example, in climate science, I've seen so many presentations now where vulnerability is being reinvented, and it's like, and look, we've kind of invented this new concept. Ta-da! I think you and I, we were in Copenhagen, right, a couple of years ago, remember, where all of a sudden this pretty much pressure and release model was introduced, and you and I did a massive eye roll. And then had a glass of wine kind of discussing this. But that really kind of, almost breaks my heart to see that there is, 50, 70, if not 100 years of literature that's just being ignored because different discipline refuses to engage with it.
Don't read each other. Yeah. Reinventing the wheel. It reminds me of one of my favorite books, which is an archaeology book, which is called The Horse, the Wheel, and the Cart, I think it's called. And it's how the Indo-Europeans moved out of this tiny little area, probably on the west of the Ural Mountains, and conquered the world. I mean, Indo-European languages are global. But everybody, they're reinventing the wheel. What is the solution for this? Better teaching, broader teaching, so that when you're teaching your particular class in sociology or anthropology or political science or economics, you bring in books from the other disciplines, not just your own scholars. That's one way. Believe it or not, I also believe that the real font of culture change is teenagers. If you bring knowledge to teenagers bring it home. And they'll say, don't do that, recycle that. get rid of this, gas-eating car. Let's go help this community. And you've got to reach not just broader disciplines, but broader generations. If we expect to continue, and we're a pretty short-lived species, so how are we going to make it as long as the dinosaurs become dinosaurs and get eliminated, or continue? We're a very short-lived species. We've only been around about 4 million years. That's not long.
No, and I was talking to my students today, and their solution. So their task is to imagine a different future, basically. And one of them just said, "Well, let's just move to another planet." And my response was, "What? So we can just screw it over as well."
And let's take our oxygen with us.
Apparently.
Yeah.
Well, anyway,
yeah, that's a great idea. Except find one which has the right conditions. Carl Sagan, of course, said that he thought there wasn't life on any other planet, and now there's a lot of thought that there is. So,
so there's always hope.
there's always argument.
There's always argument as well. Well, on this happy note, we can keep talking for hours, I think, here, but that's it for today. Susanna, thank you so much for joining us again on this episode, and thank you for the preface. It's gonna be a great opening to our book. We really can't wait for it to
I
come.
was very impressed with everything that everybody had read in there. When I saw, I think, Plato or Socrates, I thought, okay, I'm home. I get it.
Yeah, it's an eclectic mix. Let's put it that way. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. Well, for those of you watching us today, the season will soon be released as a podcast, as Jason said at the beginning, so you can get it wherever you're getting your podcasts from. And we're also hoping the book will be coming out towards the end of 2026. So we're currently planning season 11 of Disasters Deconstructed. We're not giving up. We will never give up. So watch this space. We will be back in the spring with more guests, more stories, and more ridiculous jokes. So thanks so much for joining us. Bye.
Bye. Bye.